Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and as always, joined by co-host Aaron. Aaron, how are you doing today?
I'm good. And I'm glad we were able to figure out who was going to be the host and who was going to be the guest.
There we go.
It's kind of an inside story for everyone.
That's right, man. We are, another month of the year has gone by. Another month of 2024 has gone by. We are recording this technically just before the end of April. So if we miss anything big the last couple of days, so this is another Cloud News of the Month. How has your April been so far?
It's been really good, really, really busy. I mean, day job, bunch of work travel coming up. I think you're kind of doing the same. I think it's conference season is kind of kicking in for, the day jobs. And it's also interesting. Like we've got cloud earnings and a bunch of other stuff like that, but it's been a good month overall.
Yeah, no, it's been a good month. I got to ask you a question before we get into all the technical stuff. So your team and my team, you are a fan of Clemson. I am a fan of Wake Forest. Our teams are both part of the ACC. Your team for years and years was just sort of average. There was actually a verb that talked about when your team would sort of,
choke,
fail and choke and lose. And they would call it Clemsoning. Over the last few years, you've been very good. Your coach believes that you're a big deal. And now your team has decided to sue our league, that you are too big for our league. And so my question to you is, at what point do you plan to sue the Cloudcast to try and get out of this relationship we have? Do I have to worry about that, man? Are you?
Well, that assumes there's some money to be made out of this. So, I mean, until that happens, I don't think we have to worry about it.
You're not taking offers from rival podcasts to leave for greener pastures?
Not at this time, no.
All right,
no.
Well, good. Good. Well, look, let's dive in. Looking back at the cloud news looking back at all the cloud news of the week, which you rigorously keep up with every week. If you're new to the show, in the show notes every week, there's something called Cloud News of the Week. Aaron does an awesome job of going and scouring the internet and finding all sorts of interesting stories. This show that we do monthly is sort of kind of a summary of them, but also then a deep dive into some of them. It's been a busy month. Do you want to start off with our good old fashioned cloud news?
Yeah. So for those that are new to it, I mean, there is a certain amount of, we want to bubble up the top stories in cloud that happened, right? And the reason why is because a lot of the AI stories tend to take over a lot of the news feeds these days, for better or worse, to be really honest with you. But I think we should start with cloud earnings. Cloud earnings season is here. And at least two of the public clouds.
That's right.
Checked in.
Amazon
talk about them first.
Yeah, Amazon as of the day we're recording, which is the 26th, has not announced. I think they come out on Monday, so we won't speculate on where they are. But why don't you start off with Azure and GCP's numbers, because they did publish this week.
Yeah, absolutely. So Azure, the biggest thing for me was, still growing well, considering how big they are, up 21%. And what they're calling the intelligent cloud was almost 27 billion.
Right.
And then GCP earnings up 28% and 9.5 billion as well.
Yeah. So
what was kind of your big highlights in there, though? Because I know you like digging in.
Yeah,
especially in the Jordan articles.
yeah, exactly. Shout out to our friend Jordan Nivette, who covers this religiously. I think a couple things popped up. The things that I saw was, Azure people are really speculating about how much, they've made such a big investment in things like OpenAI and some AI stuff. They're trying to pull those numbers out, right? So we've always said that Azure is always the hardest cloud to figure out, because they sort of count certain things as cloud and certain things like Office 365 and some of the server stuff. But basically, people were saying, like, if you pulled out the AI numbers, they were, at least from an infrastructure perspective, looked very, very good this last quarter. So it does feel a little bit like at least Azure is maybe a canary in terms of the spending back into cloud, as opposed to the trying to cut back on cost and be optimizing cost. Maybe we sort of reached that tipping point a little bit to where people are starting new projects. So that'll be interesting to kind of watch. I think on the GCP side, the thing that was interesting is obviously they keep growing. They're growing at slightly higher rates, and again off of smaller numbers, so the rates are going to be relative. But operating income was up 5x, so they did almost $1 billion. So I think, it was a couple of quarters ago where they first made $1 of profit after like 10 years or so. I think this last quarter they did about $150 million in profit. In this last quarter, they did about $1 billion. So, they are, whether that's through, layoffs or cost cutting or some other things internally, they are figuring out, how to become more profitable. And I don't know if that means that, they've started to, sort of steady state for all the years of spending on sales and marketing, or if, this is, driven by some of the AI stuff, because we've always said they were probably going to be a very successful AI cloud. But yeah, it's starting to see some different things from GCP than we had seen in the past in terms of especially profitability. So
yeah. A little bit of maturity finally. It only took
the other thing the other thing that caught our eye this last month and got both kind of a couple of headlines was our friends at HashiCorp. So what all happened to HashiCorp this last month?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with this one, the Open Tofu accusations, right? And it's gone into really, really a lot of detail in other podcasts, and it's a lot has been written about it. But basically, there were some accusations with Open Tofu and HashiCorp and code stealing and some other things like that, and that kind of grabbed some headlines for a while, and then HashiCorp, all of a sudden IBM swoops in. You're big overlords in the day job, right?
Yeah.
So $6.4 billion to acquire HashiCorp, and that was just recently announced. But here's a quick side to both of those that this kind of really impacts a lot of folks just in day to day. I'm doing for the day job, I'm doing an infrastructure as code talk here in a couple of weeks, and it was interesting. I put together my slides, and it was like infrastructure as code, and here's some of the tools you use, and it was like Ansible, and then it's like, oh, at the end of the day, owned by IBM, and then it was like now HashiCorp and Terraform. Oh, at the end of the day, owned by IBM, and then it was like interesting to see IBM's kind of gobbling up, if you will, and. Not related here, but something else they did recently was they did, I don't know if it was big publicly, but I had some friends that were kind of impacted. They shrunk down the consulting side of the IBM business, and then they're growing the software side of the business. Yep. So IBM's doing a little bit of right sizing, if you will, and continuing to grow the pie.
Yeah. Well, and from an IBM perspective, they've been trying to be less dependent on owned consulting, right? They spun off some things to Kyndryl, so that probably aligns to that. They've been trying to be more, kind of get back to being more innovative. I will say, and again, I'm going to try and stay away from any speculation about the HashiCorp stuff, again, because of my relationship with Red Hat and IBM. This is intended to acquire at this point, as of, April 26th or 25th, whenever this was announced. I think IBM said that, their expectation was, given all the hurdles that you have to go through for an acquisition, especially of this size, they expect it to close in at the end of 2024. So, they do expect there to be a certain amount of, normal, kind of things that you have to go through from a regulation perspective, and all the things across all sorts of different regions and stuff. So, while everybody's writing their think piece about HashiCorp, they are still an independent entity at this point in time until it closes. So just kind of keep that in mind for folks.
No, agreed.
What else you got in the good old fashioned cloud news?
Yeah, so let's talk about Cisco. Again, I feel like we're hitting all of Brian's either current or previous employers here, but Cisco launched Hypershield, and I mean, the easiest way to think about this is security meets AI, right? Yeah. And I admit I hadn't dug into this one that much. Did you get a chance to dig into this one?
I did dig into this a little bit. Some people were talking about it on one of the Slack channels. I think they were talking about it on the Software Defined Talk Slack channel. I think one of the people that's on there works for Cisco and was just kind of mentioning it to people. I had a colleague who got briefed on it and did a really good write-up. This feels like, if you've been paying attention to some of the acquisitions that Cisco's made recently, so they obviously spent a lot of money, acquired Splunk here recently. They acquired kind of a niche networking security company called Isovalent, who is kind of the behind the eBPF technology that, if you're really into Linux and networking, you would know about. And they acquired a couple of other companies, and people were like, they seem to have spent quite a bit of money, certain premium on a number of these companies. And Cisco tends to buy a lot of companies. That's sort of their innovation pattern, and then they put them back together. So in essence, Hypershield is this big, all-encompassing kind of, like you said, security meets AI thing. So their thing was basically the pitch of it is, you no longer, given the pace at which things are evolving, people are working in all sorts of places, data's coming into your business and out of your business in all sorts of different ways. There's no longer sort of just a moat around the business. You no longer can kind of just rely on firewall rules and other sort of static security. And their whole pitch is this big, very, very big, very involved, very data-centric security architecture that now is going to leverage somehow AI to sort of be looking at all this data, log data from folks like Splunk, and sort of traffic shaped or monitored data from eBPF, which is like really low level packet capturing, and sort of be this uber dynamic security thing. So I suspect, from the early speculation that I saw from people, it's, a huge vision that has a long way to go, but it will be interesting to see, how much this, becomes a talked about point, or if it's just a point in time announcement. But, Cisco made it out as if it was a really, really big deal, and kind of brought together, 4 or 5 different acquisitions to sort of pull this architecture together. So it'll be interesting to watch over time. Maybe we'll have Cisco on the show to kind of dive into it more. Because again, it seems robust in theory and complex in execution. So we'll see what happens.
Sounds good. Let's go on to the next one, man.
Yeah,
let's talk about hype rounds, right?
Yeah. Our friend over at Cloud of Judgment wrote a really good Jammin' Ball. Our friend Jammin' Ball wrote a really good thing, as he does every week, I think, or every couple of weeks on Cloud of Judgment, about hype rounds. What did you take from hype rounds? Because I think he's really kind of digging into kind of realities of VC funding versus sort of I guess hype, but also just like, how do you speculate on what's in between these rounds?
Well, here's the thing. It's always the classic, like, something isn't something till you give it a name sometimes.
Yep.
And maybe you were familiar with the term previously, but I was not familiar with the term previously, this whole concept of a hype round. So what does that mean? Well, and we've seen this many, many times in the industry. And of course, we're seeing it with the AI, a lot of the AI companies right now, this whole concept of you're raising another round and, hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever. And you've got I don't know, $3 billion valuation or a $5 billion valuation. And a lot of these rounds just tend to be hype, right? Like, it is rare these days for those companies to then necessarily exit at something like that. And it's something that's been going on in the industry for a long time. But it was good for me as I read it to like understand it, and then also like go, okay, gotcha. I see what's kind of going on here.
Here's my question. So I'm a little like you. We've been covering this space for a long time. We've had VCs on this show. We've been doing this throughout the entire sort of what they're, Silicon Valley is now calling ZIRP, or, the zero interest rate, period. Do you ever recall people talking about a hype round? I remember them talking about like, hey, this company became a unicorn or whatever. And there was times when we looked at rounds and we were like, boy, that seems like a lot of money for not needing it, right? We've seen lots of lots of CEOs who have sort of made the bold claim of like, well, we just took this money because we could. But this feels like a new term that they're trying to apply for some other, essentially like, I don't know, like it seems like they're applying a term for maybe just bad spending or, lack of accountability. I don't know. I've never heard
Yeah.
this term before. I don't know where it came
I
from.
I didn't either.
So,
and maybe Jamin made it up. I don't know that, but
maybe.
I mean, I don't know if he gets credit if it holds, if he gets to be the hype round guy, but yeah, but it's one of those, like, it's like, yeah, I saw it many times over, but I just never had a name to it.
Right.
And it's good to have a name to it. But I mean, I won't name names, but you and I, there's been some companies that, grow really, really big and get funding round after funding round, and the valuation just keeps going up and up. And, we've always kind of said on the podcast, it's a little bit of like, follow the money. Like, what's the business plan? What is it all? And we're like, how are they ever going to make money?
Right. Right. I mean, it almost feels like one of those. I mean, again, I have to go back and read the article because I don't know kind of where he's putting the onus on hype coming from. I assume it's from the VC community as opposed to the end customer, the company, but maybe it's the other way around. But it does feel a little bit like the VC community sort of going, well, we just spent a decade throwing extra money at our companies in ways that put them in really, really bad, in a position to, yes, you could grow rapidly, but we also put them in a really bad position in terms of like the leverage they had, their ability to, really grow in a normal pace. And now they're just sort of, I don't know. It just seems like one of those weird VC things where they're trying to justify, a way of doing stuff that really wasn't beneficial for the company, but maybe was beneficial for them to sort of convince the industry that, like, yes, we really think there's a lot going on in this space.
Yeah. Well, right. and last point before we jump to our AI speed round. I read recently, it was maybe a TechCrunch article. I'll go find it. It's in one of the millions of links in the deep dive, weeklies. But there was one about basically this whole idea that down rounds aren't bad anymore.
Okay.
And and so for those that aren't familiar with it, so like up until now, well, I should say up until very recently, like a startup taking a down round, meaning they took more money but the valuation went down,
right,
was kind of a kiss of death.
Yeah.
And you and I had been predicting this with the markets being the way they are and everything that's going on. A lot of companies are going to end up taking down rounds just to survive. Well, now there's starting to be some press coverage of like, well, maybe that's not a bad thing. Like maybe that's just a right sizing, or maybe that's just it is almost like the hype round, the pendulum coming back, swinging back the other way. And they were like, it's not a bad thing because they're still in business and they're still taking money and, they're still trying to get to the exit. And I was like,
yeah, I mean, I could see this on a couple of different levels, right? On one level, you go, okay, yes, if the business is still somewhat viable, they just haven't grown at the pace you wanted them to. Yes, there's some quote unquote shame in taking a down round because you're sort of acknowledging that you didn't meet the previous expectations. But again, the expectations might have been too high. But at the same time, it could also be, the VC community going like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try and get the press talking about this as if these aren't such bad things. But what we're really doing is we're saying, well, we can't get into the AI space because those costs are so high. Those entry points are so high. If we could refund some of these companies that we had previously made unicorns in a C round, D round, E round, keep them alive, keep them on life support, or maybe, keep them reasonably alive, they become very interesting targets for PE, right? So this does feel a little bit like they're playing the media in an effort to potentially hype something that for PE to pick up, or an Oracle or a Google or somebody to sort of pick them up at 50 cents on the dollar as opposed to 10 cents on the dollar or something.
Yep, agreed.
So anyways, so we've got a section we always do now we call AI speed round, or AI in that space. I tried to lump these things together so they'd be a little easier to kind of go through. The first sort of chunk we have here is all about LLMs. So you want to run through real quick all of the LLMs that have come out, or even SLMs?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's become impossible to talk about all of the LLMs because it's literally a new one almost every day, and it's become like I actually listed something as in the weeklies of like, does this even matter anymore? But here's some of the highlights, right? Meta Llama 3 came out. Apple released a pretty interesting LLM, but we're going to call it a small LLM, which is something now is a term we've talked about on the show once or twice. But and then Microsoft releases, I think you say it, Phi 3, which is an SLM, so a small language model, but the performance is really matching LLMs. But I'll say this real quick, like this whole concept of like what's an LLM, what's an SLM, how do they perform? Do they perform as well as each other? Do they perform like in certain instances? Like it's really getting to be an interesting space, but also too, it's so crowded, and like it's just going to be crazy going forward. Yeah, so that's kind of one batch, the LLM.
Yeah, it does feel like in the LLM space, like there's a couple things that they're bouncing around in my head without getting into all the technical details. One of them is like, they come out. You hear some number attached to all of them. Oh, it's a 7B model. It's been trained on 1 trillion, objects. It's a 34B model. It's a whatever. At some point, you're like, I know those numbers matter, but at some point, do they just become like the megapixels on your camera? You just sort of go like, oh yeah, okay. It just keeps getting better. It's whatever. The second thing I'm wondering is like, we just saw a bunch here in April. Like, are we going to start to see sort of that old Intel kind of TikTok thing where it's like, okay, the odd months are going to have like a big announcement and the even months are going to be like some iteration thing? Is it going to be like on a 3-month cycle, a 4-month cycle? Like, I'm kind of curious to see how that starts to shake out. And then just, is there any way for anybody who's not a super long time hardcore data scientist to figure out like which one of these models should I be picking? Like, am I okay picking one today, or am I going to constantly have buyer's remorse that one comes out tomorrow that I gotta switch to? I think that's going to be sort of interesting. And I suspect over time, it'll sort of get to be like, oh, well, I bought a laptop and I'm just going to live with it for 2 or 3 years because I can't afford to get another laptop. But I'm curious how that psychology is going to shake out.
Yeah, I think, and here's what I think we're very quickly reaching that point. I've heard this numerous times on other like AI podcasts I listen to. Basically, the quality standard these days is GPT-4 like. If it's GPT-4 or better, it's good enough, and if it's under GPT-4, it tends to be, well, it needs to be specialized or it needs to have something, extra. And so I think it's almost like, if it's GPT-4 or better, it's good enough. Yeah. Is I think going to be the benchmark going.
Yeah. I've seen that.
At least for a little while.
Yeah. I've seen that. I've seen GPT-3 Turbo sometimes because at a price point or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Next.
Let's talk about chips and acquisitions.
Chips and money.
Yeah. Chips and money. That's a good way to talk about it.
Go ahead and jump into chips and money.
Yeah. So Intel jumped back in. They have their Gaudi 3 chip that is supposed to be both faster than NVIDIA and uses less power. And by the way, the chip wars are in full strength, right? Everyone is trying to beat NVIDIA. And don't get me wrong, this is a good thing because NVIDIA has great tech. They're making a ton of money. So of course, everyone's going to go after the market. But also, too, they have such supply chain demands. I mean, everything's just going to keep getting both faster and less power hungry, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's a big market for it.
Yeah. Just I think for the industry in general, and us not necessarily like, taking a side in any of this or being cheerleaders for anything. I mean, it's never, we've never seen sort of, a giant singular monopoly be great for the industry as a whole. It's great if you are a NVIDIA shareholder or employee probably, but so it's good to see Intel, coming out and making new advances. It'll be good to see AMD do the same thing. It'll be good to see what ARM can do and all sorts of stuff. Because it's between supply chain and sort of monopolistic tie-ups or proprietary tie-ups, you do want to see more options in the industry. It's always been proven to be a good thing.
Yeah, agreed. Now let's talk money though.
Lots of money, lots of acquisitions.
Yeah, Perplexity raised $250 million at a $2.5 billion to $3 billion valuation. DataStax acquired Langflow, and NVIDIA acquires Run.ai, and that one's notable. Well, Cloudcast alone, but $700 million. I was a little surprised at going for $700 million.
Yeah. So quick summary of some of these. Perplexity is essentially sort of an AI search engine, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's sort of the new darling of Silicon Valley in terms of like, will this be what it looks like to disrupt Google in terms of search? Data stacks, for a long time, I want to say but one of those companies that lived in the sort of data lake, data, big data sort of space, has been making a bunch of acquisitions lately around AI. So Langflow being, think of it sort of as like almost like middleware or something along those lines. That's sort of linking between applications, between agents. They are sort of providing an interface on top of, I think it's LangChain. This is the core technology.
That's right.
Actually, that's something Mark Hinkle mentioned to us, so people can go back and listen to that. And then Run.ai, $700 million for Run.ai. I guess they, we had them on, I think about a year or so. I put a link in our Twitter to them. Essentially, they sort of live on top of Kubernetes, and they are a AI GPU scheduling tool for that. So $700 million sounds like a lot of money, but I guess if we put it in perspective, there had been a couple of Kubernetes companies. So Joe Beta and Craig McLucky's company, I forget what the name of them was, that VMware bought. That was around 600 or 700 million. Rancher got bought for 600 or so million. So, anything sort of on top of the Kubernetes space, I guess, 600 million isn't that out of whack. And then, given, what NVIDIA is trying to do in terms of just being really efficient, whether it's for their cloud or for something else, given the stock price, like 700 million, while it may sound high, it probably doesn't seem like too much of a drop in the bucket for them these days.
Yeah. And I will say this is, because I've worked with a bunch of the NVIDIA architectures, and I will say this, like, it was a noticeable hole in their portfolio and their software stack. And so, I mean, kudos to them, because I do think the Run.ai was the best one in that space, and they noticed a hole and they filled it. So congrats.
That'll be interesting for the Run.ai leader to be one of, 54 direct reports to Jensen Huang, probably.
Yeah, when you're at 53, what's 54?
That's right.
No big deal.
That's right.
We just added
one more person to add to the CC list. All the next stuff in our list is all chunked together because it all has to do with either Google or Google Cloud. So I'll run through these real quick. We're probably running sort of long, so we won't get into all of them. Google, at least on the consumer side, announced a huge reorganization of both the Google sort of AI team. So it wasn't Google Brain, it was Google, the other really big one internally, but aligned like Pixel, Photos, kind of all the consumery stuff that they're trying to embed AI into. They brought all those all together. So this was sort of the big thing of Google reorganizing a lot of their consumer facing assets and properties and services around AI and around not having these disparate teams trying to figure out the user interface versus, the data and so forth. So that's an interesting thing. And then there's a bunch of links to the Google Cloud conference. So Google Cloud Next, I believe they still call it.
Yes.
Lots of announcements. Everything was AI. Some of it very interesting. Some of it in the very googly way of, doing stuff like showing you the 12 different ways that they could figure out how to help you find an orthodontist, assuming your kid doesn't have any friends, your wife or spouse doesn't know anybody, you get no ads, but like you're going to use Google to help you find an orthodontist. So there was some of those weird Google things where Google does stuff where you're like, oh, you don't interact with people, but you could really make it interesting with technology. So lots of stuff in there, but also a lot of very, very interesting stuff, Gemini 1.5 stuff and some other enterprise stuff. So
I will say this real quick, and I think this is a trend. We're already seeing it at Google, and I think you're starting to see it at Microsoft as well. I can't really comment on AWS as much, but I mean, I think everyone like, hey, we're going to put AI in everything. We're going to put an AI in the consumer products. We're going to put AI in the enterprise products. And the next thing you know, there's 10 co-pilots floating around internally because everyone built their own. And then at some point, they have to consolidate and make sense of their own portfolio, more or less the rest of the market. They just start to confuse everyone trying to be first to market.
Yeah, and just to put this in perspective for anybody that doesn't think that stuff sort of happens, when I was at Cisco years and years ago, we did voice over IP. We worked on a technology called SIP, Eventually, we had 16 different SIP stacks within the company working on different products that were all slightly different, and they all, while they all use the standard, they all use different APIs and different implementations. So it can happen in the smallest of companies and the biggest of companies. Let's jump ahead to a couple of the trends that we always do at sort of the ends of these shows. We're at about the 30-minute mark. We'll try and bang through these fairly quickly. We've got 3 trends this week. You want to hit on the first one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first trend is really, and I think it's just a continuation of 2024 is a really big year for just announcements, right? Lots of acquisitions, lots of new models, lots of talking about investments. And it's interesting to me because, like, if you kind of follow the traditional S curves of pretty much all markets and categories kinds of things, right? Like, it is interesting to me of like, we are definitely in the boom year of everything, right? Like, OpenAI kind of changed the world with ChatGPT in late 2022. And then everyone kind of recognized that and picked their head up and was like, oh, wow, there's a new thing. Let's go chase that. And guess what? It takes a certain amount of time to get things funded and get things built and get things brought to market. And we are right in the middle of that. We're almost at probably peak hype, if you will. And I think the trough of disillusionment is going to be the next macro trend, right? But for now, we're definitely in the boom time.
No, and well, I mean, you've got a lot of money that was still around in companies from after COVID and so forth. You've got these new sort of big trends that are happening, and you've got companies that are looking across the table or across the marketplace. And we used to have, a big announcement every 6 months or 12 months from your biggest competitor, maybe every 5 or 6 months. And it feels like it's, you look across the table in whatever part of the industry you're in. And again, this could be technology, but it could also be in automotive. It could be in pharmaceuticals. And everybody feels like they're making big announcements and big bets kind of all the time. So it's one of those, it does feel like, especially in the tech sector, like it's definitely a hold on to your hat kind of year. Don't be surprised by almost anything. And some of that feels kind of interesting because we are also, at least here in the US, we are in the middle of an election year, which, people tend to sort of like hold back on making big decisions until the election happens and they sort of have some perspective on what they think the next, government will look like. But people in the tech industry aren't holding back at all. So yeah, don't be surprised by any announcement that you see on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, because people are, I don't want to say like afraid of missing out, but I mean, there's definitely people pushing a lot of money on the table in terms of, we're going to make big bets. We're not making small bets. And those could be, like you said, acquisitions or anything.
Yeah. Well, I'll add one more trend that I'm seeing too, though, is, and I'll call out 2 instances in particular. The companies want to make sure if somebody else announces something, they're going to announce something too, sometimes even if that isn't finished, right? So Google Gemini caught a lot of shit for, announcing some of their things and kind of faking their demo and stuff wasn't released yet and really borderline getting over their skis. And then OpenAI, they were in the early days kind of known for like, hey, here's an announcement. And oh, by the way, the product's there now. And just having an incredible release velocity. But even now with the last couple of announcements, it's like, oh, yes, we're absolutely doing that, but it's coming later this year. Or we're absolutely doing that, but it's still in beta. So you're starting to also see the rate of announcements outstrip the velocity of the products.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think the other thing that we're going to start to see, and we'll get into this, like maybe we'll just jump into the next trend, is we are starting to see some early reality set in with AI. We had something in our notes that we didn't really get to. So, an example of that is like Stability AI, who was one of the companies who was doing really cool stuff on the graphic side of things. So helping to, like generate me a picture of whatever, starting to get people thinking about like, oh, this is going to impact Hollywood and other creators. Basically ran out of money. Basically, was not taking in enough money, realized that their AI bill with folks like AWS and others was, they're $100 million behind or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we're going to see some realities of, hype versus business models, and AI chews up so much money so fast that we won't have these long, 4, 5, 6, 7 year companies. We might see a lot of 18-month companies, kind of burn through some stuff. And I think, the other reality we're going to see is, I think people are realizing you can't fake your demos the way that you could 6 months ago, even.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
People are getting very, very smart about being like, that's not possible. You can't do that today. How much of that was faked? But like you said, they're sort of offsetting that with, it'll be here, but it'll be here in 6 months, as opposed to being like, look at what we just did with this latest thing and this latest demo.
Yep. Agreed.
Last thing I had on here, as we sort of wrap this up, a lot of things I feel like, and again, this is probably enterprise centric. I know you and I sort of live in the sort of enterprise part of tech. I feel like there's probably a lot going on, but a lot of things are being lost between sort of the yin and yang for every enterprise organization, every enterprise CIO, between what they're dealing with, their future with Broadcom VMware, since that's a big part of their bill, big part of their infrastructure, big part of how they build applications, and the AI discussions. And I feel like every conversation that I see is somewhere on either end of that spectrum, but very few conversations in between. Are you seeing anything similar?
Yeah, no, I it's your classical CIO dilemma of like, how much of my budget is keeping the lights on and how much of my budget goes towards innovation, right? And a good CIO is constantly trying to lever as much as they can towards innovation and pressing ahead. But the problem with that is, I think, VMware Broadcom is just one example, but I think there's some other things going on where you're starting to see lots of, like, the keeping the lights on typically meant steady state.
Yeah.
Well, now the keeping the lights on isn't steady state.
Right.
And,
exactly.
And so what you're starting to see is a disruption of stuff that's worked for 10 years, 15 years. Now suddenly I got to go potentially swap out some software. I might have to potentially go create a new stack. I might have to, maybe I'm pulling in a digital transformation project, or, a going to cloud or going to cloud native. And so what I think you're seeing more than anything is the quote unquote legacy business is suddenly kind of getting turned on its head. And because it's getting turned on its head, it's causing a lot of disruption. And oh, by the way, we're getting all this pressure to go do all this AI stuff, which is a whole different stack and a whole different set of hardware and software. Honestly, it's kind of a shit time to be a CIO.
It's a very, very hard time, because your budgets are, your budget, like you said, you used to know how to manage your budget. You would have times that, things would get a little weird or a little out of whack, but you had some steady things that you could just trust, and you knew were going to work, or whatever. And right now I imagine all of them are sitting there going, every day feels like you've got this balloon and you're just squeezing one part of the balloon and the other part puffs up. And then 2 minutes later, you squeeze the other part of the balloon and some other part puffs up. And you're like, how do I deal with this thing? Because I've got uncertainty on the AI side, but all this sort of demand and hope and build up on the infrastructure side of things, or the legacy, or the green, the heritage side. What do they call it? Heritage side these days.
Okay. So I had not heard that.
I've heard people call legacy something else. I want to say they call it heritage. It's a hipster kind of word to say, like, oh, it's still really important. It's not old and dusty.
It's the sipping your own champagne versus eating your dog food or whatever it is.
Right. Like, but it's all of a sudden, like, you have to be paying attention to that space, because the bill might be 5x or 3x or 2x or 7x or whatever it might be. And so yeah, there's got to be a lot of interesting conversations as a CIO these days in terms of what it's the next 6 months going to look like, what's the next year going to look like. The economy is kind of stabilized to where they probably have a pretty good sense of things, or it feels like they have a sense of things. But I feel bad for anybody who is working on stuff that is in between those ends of the spectrum, because right now you are getting so little attention, so little headlines, so little visibility, so little sunlight, that it's got to be sort of weird to be in that space right now.
Agreed.
All right, man. Well, that was April. I think, as far as I know, as far as you have told me, you are likely going to be out for the May news of the month. So we're gonna have to try and find a backup, because you're gonna be traveling a whole bunch.
Yeah, I'm pulling a Brian. I'm going to be gone almost the whole month of May. I think I'm home 6 days.
Nice.
The whole month of May.
I'm not coming to mow your grass, so you got to find something else.
I mean, it's a combination of professional travel and personal travel, but yeah, I'm seriously gone the whole month. And I was looking ahead, because we fortunately we are scheduling out a good bit again, and we've been managing all of that. And I kind of looked at the show schedule the other day, and I was like, oh no, wait a second, I am not going to be here for that.
Yeah. So just one small heads up in that sense. Aaron has been very, very diligent to make sure we will have shows, I think, literally booked out. You've already booked them out, and we may have recorded some that are into May and maybe even into June. So if we do happen to mess up and mention something that is ahead of schedule or behind schedule, if you're listening to a show and say May and you're like, that sounds like something from April, we apologize for that. We tried not to do that, but it may have happened so that Aaron can live his life without being tied to the Cloudcast 24 hours a day.
Exactly.
Well, listen, man, it's been a good month. It seems like things are picking up. I was a little worried in February; it was slow. March was starting to pick up, and April feels like it's full throttle. The industry is back. Things are warmer. Sunshine is out. That means tech is in full throttle at this point. So, good month. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for listening to us both on the audio show, as well as hopefully if you're checking it out on the video show, we appreciate that as well. Any last thoughts for April, man?
No, I'm really looking forward to May. I think May is going to be, as you said, I feel like it's been a nice roll up for the year, and February and then March and April, May is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
I just have a feeling.
Stuff. All right, folks, with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend, and we will talk to you next month.